Hello my treasures, it's time to end Year of the Hydra with a little bit of a bang with 10 wacky decks to try out before the rotation happens. For this video, there will be decks that I have showcased on this channel before and decks that I have not. There should be an even balance between the two, and the new decks will represent cards that I really wanted to try something out with before they did rotate out, but I didn't really have enough time to. So let's begin. The first one we are going to be going over is Vander's Charge. This is basically Charge Warrior. We're trying to use Vander Stormpike to discount all the charge minions within a warrior, such as Captain Galvangar or Mr. Smite, then copying them with Faceless Manipulator and granting them double attack. We also do have cards like Lothamar in order to double the stats on all of this to make it a much easier time than we would have had before. And to make it where you can actually survive long enough to pull off this wacky combo, you are going to be using a big control package. For this one, the mulligan guide basically is going to be any early game removal tools. Frozen Bulker in combination with Shield Shatter is incredibly good. Vander is always a must keep in any type of Vander deck. Alright, now time for the next one, which is going to be Garroot Rogue. The idea behind Garroot Rogue is going to be using the new Silver Moon Arcanus in order to buff up our Garroots that we are going to be shuffling into our deck, while discounting all the cards in our hand by targeting an efficient Autobot with a Ghostly Strike in order to trigger its Frenzy. We also are going to be using one copy of Gadgets and Auctioneer and Edwin so we can do upwards to 50 damage in a single turn using the powerful combo here. The deck basically plays like a Miracle Rogue style of deck using the long forgotten card of Garroot. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for some of your key combo pieces such as Garroot, so you can easily discount it if you find a Octobot. However, outside of this, you are going to be looking for the concoction package because this will allow you to survive long enough to actually pull off the full combo. And now for the next one. This is going to be Fandrel's Burning Path, aka Choose One Armor Druid. The idea behind this deck is to use a lot of the powerful Choose One cards that will gain you a bunch of armor in combination with Fandrel's Staghelm in order to do the Wombo combo or just be able to outsurvive most opponents. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for any cards that will draw you into additional cards, or ramp cards, or early game minions. These would include cards like Druid of the Reef, or Planted Evidence, or even Moonlit Guidance. And of course, because we are trying to use Staghelm, you're also going to probably be looking for him. Now, for the next deck, we're going to be going over Reno Freeze Mage. The idea behind this deck is to use the powerful Frost Mage support that will be rotating out. We also are going to be using Reno Jackson in order to heal ourselves up to full for a perfect control style of deck. For the mulligan guide of the deck, anything that is 4 or lower cost within this deck is great to keep in your open hand outside of Prince Renathal. Cards like Wildfire are incredibly good because this will allow you to scale up your hero power quickly, or any cards that will generate you additional threats, such as Babbling Book. Raw power is always nice in this style of deck too because it does allow you to survive a lot longer while getting access to a lot of your survivability. And now, out of all the new decks, the biggest meme of them all, Boar Demon Hunter. The idea behind this is to use L1 Boar in combination with Shire Farmer in order to get the Sword of Thousand Truth to shut out your opponent from the game completely. We also are going to be using cards like Abyssal Depths to guarantee access to these L1 boars that we're shuffling into our deck, or even the Northshire Farmers, in order to have easy access to this combo. This deck was actually so close of becoming a full-length video on its own, I just didn't have enough time to do it. The best thing about this deck in particular is most of these cards are actually going to be rotating out. The Fel package is going to go bye-bye once the new rotation actually happens, and so will L1 Boar. This is also probably one of the better decks that you can try L1 Boar out in, outside of Priest or Druid. I was actually quite shocked of how consistent it actually felt that you could actually get all of the boars dead. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for any of the early game removal tools. This is prioritizing cards like Relic of Extinction with Relic Vault. If any card that can draw you into additional cards is really good to keep in your open hand, especially something like Abyss Depths, which will allow you to draw into your boars really quickly. Speaking of the boars are always really good to keep in your open hand, at least one copy of, so whenever you draw into the Northshire Farmer on turn 4 or later, you can just slam both of them down. Okay, now it is time to go over some older decks that were featured on the channel already. First one of these decks is going to be Kazakhstan Quest Hunter, where we are going to be using Kazakhstan as a big payoff for Questline Hunter if it goes into the long game, thus trying to fix some of the issues that Questline Hunter usually has, where you don't really have a late game plan if you run out of resources. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for any early game removal tools. Things like Ricochet Shot in combination with Merchant Spines is really good in combination with each other, especially if you know your opponent is going to go for a wide board. However, if they aren't going for a wide board, you're going to prioritize cards that will act as single target removal. Outside of this, you're going to be looking for any cards that will draw you into additional cards. Okay, now for the next one, which is one of the more wacky ones, AAECAQcIx Paladin. The idea behind this is to use AAECAQcIx Starseeker in order to get the Golden Monkey to overwhelm your opponent with a bunch of golden legendaries. This is not the strongest deck in the world. I freely admit to it. However, AAECAQcIx is probably the wackiest card that is going to be rotating out once Year of the Hydra actually ends, so I really wanted to showcase her anyways. Generally, with how this deck is actually built, you are going to have a really easy access to finding her within the deck. Most of the cards will either search her out or make it a much easier time for you to do so. However, if you can't find her in a timely manner, this deck plays like an aggro Paladin deck, while also using a Bronze Explorer and a bunch of the amalgams in order to try to access Kazakhstan if you need a backup plan to AAECAQcIx. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for AAECAQcIx Starseeker. However, outside of this, you are going to be looking for any early game minions. These would include cards like Knights of Atonement, so you have easy access to Bless Goods, which should in theory allow you to get access to additional copies of Battalion, or Order in the Court, which will allow you to reorder your deck so you can instantly draw into AAECAQcIx in 2 turns. Iron Deep Trog is also always good to keep in your open hand, especially against the classes that use a lot of spells. And now probably for the wackiest deck out of these all, which is my Brainworms deck, aka Shadow Questline Priest. The idea behind this deck is to use ETC to give yourself access to seek guidance within Shadow Priest. The other 2 cards in ETC's pool don't really matter too much. And while completing the questline isn't always possible, if you can, it is incredibly funny. We do have the backup plan of overwhelming our opponent with a bunch of really cheap undead minions, which is always a good thing to do. Again, much like a lot of these other decks that are centered around one card, ETC is the card that you're really searching for. However, outside of this, you are going to be playing much like a Shadow Priest deck, where you're going to be looking for early game minions such as Incorporeal Corporal, Void Touch Attendant. If you have any of these early game minions, Animate Dead is also really good to keep in your open hand, or anything else that will allow you to draw into additional cards. Now let's get into the impending doom of Year of the Hydra, aka Fel Imp Warlock. It's no secret that Fel Warlock is one of those decks that I really did love. However, it never did get any additional support when the best cards were in a rotation. And what I mean by this is Felfire in the Hold. Felfire in the Hold is actually an incredibly good card. It scales twice off of any spell damage that you actually put out on the board, thus making things like Silver Moon Arcanist incredibly good. It hits both your opponent's board and their face, and nothing can actually stop you from wiping out your opponent's board so you can get to that sweet face. For the mulligan guide of the deck, it plays very similar to standard Imp Warlock. However, we do have the Grave Defiler as an early game minion that we can also mulligan for. However, most cases, you're probably not going to want to keep it in your open hand unless you have access to Felfire in the Hole and no other Fel spells in that hand. Normally, you're probably going to be looking for cards like Frustrated Librarian, Flame Imp, or Imp Sworn to keep in your open hand, as these will all allow you to swarm the board with a bunch of imps. Vile Library and Fiendish Circle are also worth mentioning here. Oh boy, we're at the last deck, which is going to be Hot and Cold Kragwa Shaman. The idea behind the deck is to use Kragwa the Frog in combination with Cold Storage, Ajaran Scroll, and Scalding Geyser. But truth be told, you really only need Kragwa, Cold Storage, and whatever direct damage and spell that you can get your hands on. This allows you to go infinite with these 3 cards, because it turns out Kragwa returns any spell you cast on the previous turn to your hand, and Cold Storage gives you additional copy of whatever minion you target with it, aka Kragwa, thus allowing you to just keep on going until your heart's content or your opponent actually gives up. And the nice thing about this version of the deck in particular is Ajaran Scrolls allows you to never go into fatigue. However, you're probably not going to survive if you don't play any cards before you play down the combo, which means we are going to be using the Evolve pack. For the mulligan guide of the deck, you are going to be looking for any type of draw cards within it. This will allow you to draw into your key combo pieces cards that will generate you additional minions on board, such as Schooling or Carving a Chisel. And finally, AoE board clears or the Evolve cards. Alright, so those were the 10 decks that I had to showcase today. Sorry for the Death Knight fans, there are no cards really rotating out that affect Death Knight in any way, so I didn't really feel like showcasing that class. One other thing worth mentioning though is most of these decks were built to showcase cards that are going to be rotating out. While most of these decks do have probably around a 50% win rate, there are some that have below. I tried my hardest to make sure they all had at least a 40% win rate before actually showcasing them off, but really, please do not go out of your way to craft any cards that are going to be rotating out. However, it is really never worth this close to rotation to craft any cards, especially if you don't play Wild. But like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, bye bye.